Welcome to Advus After Hours, a podcast focused on the intersection of innovation, finance, and community. Today, we are joined by Taj Adhav, a local executive who has held leadership roles at several Central Florida's most recognizable companies, including Disney and Channel Intelligence, which is an Orlando-based company acquired by Google in 2013 for over $125 million. In 2015, he had a conversation that led to the recognition of pain points for tenant managers in the commercial real estate industry. 2 years later, Taj found a solution and pitched the idea for Leasecake at the Techstars Global Startup Weekend, where it won the showcase in a field of entrepreneurs from 200 cities, 58 countries, and 6 continents. Today, Leasecake is a venture-backed success, gaining market share and helping business owners streamline their lease and location management, as well as saving them money and making their lives easier. Taj, welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely. Super excited to be a part of this, Mitchell. Jeff, let's get going.
Thank you.
So usually I'd start with something which is we all have common, which is Florida and the Gators, but why don't we jump back well before then and talk about maybe your upbringing and leading into your education, then we can move into the more career portion of the conversation.
So you probably have read this or seen different, videos, et cetera, but I'm first generation, youngest son of immigrant family. Parents came from India to Canada, $6 in their pocket. And I was born in Ottawa, Canada. I was raised in Toronto. And my parents started this high-tech company, lasers and electro-optics. Dad, PhD in physics. My mom, high school education. And my brother's 9 years older than me, and he's the engineer. And in any typical Indian family, it's like when you got your own company, the oldest son takes the engineering job and the youngest may take a business job. So they said, you should become a CPA.
Gotcha.
Had no clue what that even meant. And we immigrated into the U.S. So I'm dual citizen. My parents are up in Lake Mary.
At what point did you immigrate into the U.S.?
That was I was 17.
Okay.
And moved the company onto the U.S. border, basically on the Niagara River, just outside of Niagara Falls. Hired, Americans and got the green card, that whole process. But I didn't have a vote in the matter, right? Moving from Toronto to somewhere in Florida, my parents said, we're going to move to Florida, Orlando of all places. And it turns out that it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Went to school here, high school in Longwood, then, leaned into bookkeeping, and I still kind of was on the CPA accounting track. Still had no idea how hard it was or how much I really didn't like it, but I was like pushing a giant rock up a hill. So graduated, got my master's degree, fell in love madly with my beautiful wife, 37 years. And she's also a Gator.
Nice.
So got a job in Big Four. I was an intern, and then, got my master's, got my CPA license, and was working at KPMG downtown Orlando.
And so what was it that made your family say, let's move to Orlando, Lake Mary?
Well, I guess if you're in Canada, one too many snowstorms. They had a lot of different customers all over the world. When you talk about lasers and high-tech electro-optic devices, there was, Lockheed Martin back in the day, Martin Marietta, Department of Defense, academic institutions, Sandia Labs. So many of their customers were here in the States. So there were a few too many postal strikes, a few too many snowstorms, and they said, we're done and we're ready to move.
Yeah, that makes sense when you kind of laid that out with Lockheed and all those companies with the laser industry. And I feel like it's still that way to this day.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to what Orlando was like when you first moved here, because it's obviously changed so much in the past 2.5 decades. But I'm curious what you remember and how it's changed.
Well, I remember a lot of it. I remember almost all of it. I mean, it was literally like late 70s, and it was sleepy, agriculture, heavy on tourism. Obviously, it's very, early days of Disney and the theme parks being open. But I've watched Orlando grow up really a big chunk of my life. And it's so inspiring to see where it is today versus where, it was when I came here. So, downtown, super small, Lake Eola, obviously, but the neighborhoods now,
right,
the bike trails, all the investment in the transportation infrastructure, with the Sunrail and then obviously the Brightline connections coming. It's, I think we're kind of now poised for our next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It feels really great.
If you could name that next chapter, what do you think it is for Orlando?
Aerotropolis.
Wow.
So it's we are one of the largest airports in the world, serving, what is it, like 100 million, maybe somewhere between 80 to 100 million, probably is our next chapter. And if you think of all the connections between our airport, car rentals, massive, right? But the investment we put in our infrastructure to connect humans from city to city, location to location, I think is really important. So to be that destination in the middle of a state that can grow on all four sides versus South Florida or Tampa, we're kind of poised for, obviously we've seen incredible growth, but I think we'll see even better, and we just have to manage it wisely.
What led you to the University of Florida as your college?
Wow.
Because you're a dual Gator, correct?
Yeah, Gator? That's right. Yeah, got my bachelor's and then got my master's. So, in all candor, my parents knew that, university was automatic for their kids, right? So it wasn't anything special to graduate high school. Like, it's automatic to go to college. So applied to, the typical ones that you would expect. And I frankly wanted to be as far away from Orlando as I could. Right. So I got first offer letter, like, oh my God, this is great. The second offer letter, this is great. But throughout, my childhood, watching how businesses are run, there's CPAs that I meet and lawyers that I meet, through my parents and the insurance brokers, and every one of them were Gators. Right. So I got the final offer letter. I'm like, okay, I think it's going to be University of Florida. And my mom and dad are like, everybody that they knew coming here to Central Florida was a Gator. Mm-hmm. So boom, it just happened, and no regrets.
Do you go back up at all? Have you been back to Gainesville recently? Because it's changed a ton.
Oh my God.
I can tell you that.
Yeah. I've been back. It's ever since we started Leasecake, it's harder to kind of take some time. I'd say probably twice a year during the football season. We go up there, and certainly, holy cow, all the favorite, dive bars and haunts have changed, but it's neat. Obviously things can't stay the same forever.
I'm up there all the time. We were telling you what we were doing with the football team, and I just did my master's up there, and month to month it's changing.
Oh,
it's not even, once a year. It's just a completely different city than it was.
Congrats, Jeff. So what was your master's in?
It was at MBA at Florida.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It was great.
I'm going to interview you.
Yeah, exactly. Turn the tables. We talked about a little bit how, you had the accounting background, CPA, you're doing that for, I think about 15 years or so. What was it that kind of made you transition into other parts of your career leading to where you are now?
I didn't realize that I wasn't really great at being a CPA and accountant until I look back. I was at KPMG for a number of years. Disney recruited me in. That was probably one of the big life-changing moments. For a decade, I worked there. So the first project with this, it was like 200 plus million, 3,000 room resort hotel. And I was 27 years old. What I started to see was, it was a big startup company within a huge, Fortune 100 company, the Disney development company. So I just felt like, man, I'm getting a lot of energy, even though I was in the finance capacity, overseeing the financial side of projects between a development director and a construction director and myself. That was kind of the core team you need to succeed and build something that's amazing, that delights your guests. So I kind of thrived in that environment, and it's almost like it was a startup. Like every real estate project, and you've probably seen this, you put together talent, you put together capital, and you put together the plan, and then you build something amazing. And at the end of it, you have the grand opening, and that team moves on to the next project. So it was kind of like a startup after startup, but I didn't realize it. So Disney Vacation Club was the next big venture that Disney invested in. I was the first, finance controller of those projects, and getting exposed to how projects are built, doing things outside of the theme park was fantastic at Vero Beach and at Hilton Head. So seeing the real estate side of the talent that Disney brought in, right? It wasn't just theme parks and rides. So that was also life-changing for me. And then the next biggest event was Disney Cruise Line. So I was probably the equivalent of employee number 20 at Disney Cruise Line when they started. And it was this big $1 billion project, build 2 cruise ships, buy an island, develop the island, and outfit the ship. And that was 5 years of my life.
Wow.
Massive learning that I got from that. Lived overseas, lived in Italy where the ships were being built just outside of Venice. But something inside of me, to answer your question, Jeff, something inside of me started to trigger, because at that point, it was almost, $2 billion in projects that I'd been involved with. There were more and more zeros.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, frankly, Disney ran out of zeros, but I was living overseas at the time with my kids. They were like 5 and 7. My wife and I looked at her and said, when we come back to Florida, because we were living as expats, so when we come back to Florida, I think I'm going to need to do something different. I don't know what that is yet, but I want to repot myself because there was something in me that wasn't being fed.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think generally people may reach that point, but you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I could do this and, not really jump out of bed in the morning, work on projects that just give me a paycheck. And oh my God, you talk about golden handcuffs at Disney. I mean, you're surrendering theme park tickets and silver passes, and I could get you and your families in right now. It'd be amazing.
Right.
So one of the worst days for my parents were when I told them I left Disney. They were like, "Wait, all these perks are gone." But I recognized enough in what I wanted for my future was I'm willing to take a 2/3 pay cut. So joined a small tech company, and it was soon to be known as Channel Intelligence,
Right.
but it was called YouKnowBest.com. And an ex-Microsoft GM came from Seattle, moved to Central Florida, and he was about to get his first $1 million funding round. And I said, man, I want to be your CFO. So I sent him some emails, and there was a good fit because he knew I needed to repot myself. And
Right.
I wanted to really look at what was happening with the internet and .com and e-commerce.
And so did you have a relationship there previously, or you just kind of sought him out and made that happen?
It was one of those random things where we ended up meeting together. We lived in Celebration, Florida, which is the Disney town, which is another chapter for another day. So it was nice to just kind of connect with somebody organically, find each other, and just kind of like you guys, right? You collect really amazing people through your life, and then suddenly some opportunity presents itself.
How long did that next phase at Channel? How long was that stretch, and how did you start to take that into some of what you're doing now?
It was probably about 1.5 years or 2 that I was a CFO.
Okay.
And I said, okay, you need to hire my replacement. I found that our customers were really large manufacturers. He was talking about like HP and Intel, Panasonic and Sharp. I could see in their eyes that they were more excited about the potential than our founders were, because they were more technical. They were like, hey, we got a really cool thing. It's solving problems, but the potential of what it could solve was so massive. So I said, I want to move into BD. And I did that, and it worked really well. Like I figured out what I was born to do. I love building teams. I love building solutions. I love listening to customers, and they'll tell you, what to build and what they'll buy. So I ended up spending a lot of time out west with HP and with Intel. Landed Best Buy as our first retail client. And lo and behold, we had this platform, kind of like we were sitting in the middle with this technology. So I stayed there for 9 years.
Okay.
I grew the company, headed up our European initiative, moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and came back, got promoted. But I was just, there was just a lot of shiny objects that we kept shifting from, point A to point B, quarter on quarter, that I said, okay, I'm done. I was fortunate because I was an early hire there. I was like employee number 8. Was able to become an early investor, and I didn't make, life-changing money, but 5 years later, I think Google acquired us in 2013, 2014.
Right.
And that was a nice feather in our cap.
Yeah.
in Orlando to have, Google do something here.
It's still talked about to this day, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the biggest kind of exits in a company in Orlando.
Well, I mean, like large, a large behemoth like Google to acquire us. From a dollars perspective, 125 million was a nice number at the time.
Right.
But there are companies that have certainly eclipsed that.
Right.
But it was, it was just a great thing that you learn, and you look inside yourself and you say, man, I'm still hungry. Who else is still hungry? Who wants to do something amazing? So we got, a good contingent of team members that come from that background too at Channel Intelligence.
I think talking about the hunger leads us into kind of where you're at now and founding Leasecake. And I'm actually most interested to start in the fact that, from what I understand, you came up with the idea or had the idea at breakfast and then revisited it 2 years later. So I specifically want to talk about that period of time for 2 years and how you came back to the idea, because I think that's one of the most difficult things, at least from our experience and the conversations we've had, is making that jump and storing something away and then realizing when the timing's right and coming back to it. So talk about the transition, then we can get more into where you all are now.
I think one of the great successes and one of the great curses is when you're acquired, right? When Google made the acquisition, and I was kind of on to other things. I was doing some consulting and, was part of that exit. And it was certainly, part of the reason that it succeeded, right? There was still a great team that continued it, but it's almost like you get tainted. Like, oh my God, I'm unstoppable. Where can we go next? And it turns out, and I think I mentioned this, before we started the little chat, is I think successes don't define you as much as your failures do. So, in my life, I've had successes, had great life experiences, but man, if you don't look failure in the eye and realize, man, what are you made of? And how does that help you grow, right? You can either win or learn. And I just chose to learn. So when I met this guy, not necessarily randomly, but over a cup of coffee at a diner, one of his friends had invited me over to his New Year's Eve party, probably about 6 months prior. And he said, just, bring a bottle of champagne and you'll hit it off. And we had a great time. And then 6 months later, boom, I said, hey, Jim Bankston, you're here, local Florida, Orlando guy, Winter Park. You've got this family office, multi-tenant buildings. I'd love to get to know you better. And at that meeting, he looked at me and he said, Taj, you're a business guy and you're a tech guy. Let me show you some of the leases that I have. Let me show you some of the problems that I'm dealing with, And I'm always, curious. It's like, okay, well, so wait a minute. You've got systems in place. You've got QuickBooks, you've got Google, you got Dropbox and all that stuff.
Right.
Why aren't they all stitched together?
Right.
Why is it still a problem? He's like, because they're not connected. So I guess, it's kind of be careful who you talk to at a diner because when he shared the idea with me, I was like, man, I just think that there's something there. Everybody in business owns or leases a location. And it reminded me of my parents because they were commercial tenants. They became landlords overnight, and then they built their own building with space for tenants. And I said, it doesn't matter what side of the real estate equation you're on. There's a solution. It's just like what we did at Channel Intelligence. We didn't just charge one side. We charged the other side. We charged manufacturers and their retailers because everyone has their own value prop. So with the same technology, you can build something that's amazing. So it stuck with me. And this is the point in time when, failures shape you.
Right.
I was out of a job. This is probably, like I say, I've been fired more times than I've been hired in my life. I mean, oftentimes like I've fired myself out of roles because I just know that it's just not working. I'm making a rich person richer. So as he was sharing this idea, I said, you know what? I'm just going to learn how to code. I mean, like, okay, yeah, right. It's like I'm going to learn how to play the pan flute or something,
Right.
I mean, never got around to learning how to code, but there's all these, Udemy, build an app kind of thing. And I had sketched out what I thought this app would be. And then I texted him and I said, hey, you know what? Leasecake.com is available. What do you think of Leasecake? Rhymes with cheesecake. It's a piece of cake. Who doesn't like cake? I mean, I love cake. And he's like, hey, that's cool. So I still didn't buy the domain. Another year goes by. And then I got invited to Techstars Global Startup Weekend. And it's at that moment, 4 hours beforehand, I bought the domain. I wrote the pitch in the, my backyard, kept it in my back pocket, and, kind of the rest is history.
So how did that invitation to Techstars happen?
It's a lot of people that you collect in your life. I don't know. It's a spirit of positivity, but I met a few folks that I reconnected with post Channel Intelligence. Dennis Poppy, number one. He was hosting an event downtown, probably on a Wednesday night. And I heard there's a Techstars event. They sent me some tickets. They said, you should be a mentor at this event. And I said, sounds great. It's build a company in 54 hours and, stop by. So I got the tickets on that Thursday. Friday, I was like, what's this all about? And they said, you should just come. And that's when it clicked. I said, I think I should do something with this. Let me write the pitch. Let me buy the domain. Let me call Jim on the drive to downtown. And and I was the last one to pitch. There were 39 pitches. It was like silly ideas, serious ideas, funny ideas. And then I said, if it's not now, it's never. So I grabbed the microphone. I was the last one, and I pulled this piece of paper out of the back of my pocket, and I literally wrote the pitch, 2 hours prior. And I said, "Hi, we're Leasecake. Blah 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 blah. Join us. It's a piece of cake." Like 60 seconds, and then we had a team and put that together. We built a prototype at that Sunday and had a
So
pitch.
it started that fast, like from pitch to starting the company in 2 days or a week rather.
Yeah, that's right. So we went Orlando. This is a little over 5 years ago, Mitchell. So we went Orlando. 2 weeks later, we submitted this video to the regional Techstars judges. We win North America, and then globally we won across 200 cities in 58 countries. I was still out of a job. And that's kind of where you have to look yourself in the eye and say, okay, this is my 10th life, and I'm either going to die doing this, or I'm just going to take a regular job and work as some business development role and hate my life for the rest of my life. I'm not going to do that.
And so that was your sign, essentially, that invitation to Techstars and that run you went on with those pitches afterwards. You almost didn't have a choice anymore, it sounds like.
You're right. I think that really was it. It was a very calculated decision, but man, a lot of dark days. I mean, when you have a startup and you're like, oh my God, okay, we won. Well, so what? What does that mean? Who do you know? And that's when I started to work my network. Like, okay, we need some developers. We need a head of product. Our head of product comes from Channel Intelligence. And, he had a full-time job at the time. And he's like, I'm all in. So he's my co-founder. Jim Banks is our co-founder, advisor. One of our very first hires on the engineering side, he's now our director of engineering, overlooking like 15 engineers all the way up.
So how quickly did you go from assembling that team to having a tangible product?
I'd say the first year we were kind of faking it until we made it. Like, we had customers, they were using it, and we gave it away. And I think that's one of the most important lessons. Make sure you put your product in the hands of customers as fast as possible, because we didn't just dream this up in our garage. This was based on a problem, and the more people that we spoke to, they said, I'd buy Leasecake, and here's 5 more people to talk to. And everyone said, if my tenant succeeds, I succeed. If my landlord succeeds, I succeed. By giving it to people and listening to them and saying, how do you like it? What's missing? That first year was really the discovery of moving from a prototype to something that was really viable. People, they were parting with their money.
And so that was was that 2017, 2018?
2018, yep.
And so it's kind of, you're growing at that stage and learning, and then COVID's not too far around the corner from there. How did that impact your business?
We didn't know what was around the corner, but we knew, in the world of technology, prop tech it's a great, strong buzzword, but we never really felt we were prop tech. We felt that we were really more of a solution that was waiting to be discovered. Right? We knew that it was viable. We knew as soon as our customers touched it and they saw their data in it, they just fell in love with it because it was very approachable, very simple, very flexible. So for the probably at least a year and a half, 2019 through 2020, we had very on average like 4.5 to 6.5 full-time equivalents. We're still super lean. And we just knew that we moved from being a landlord solution to be really a tenant-focused solution, and 90% of our customers were tenants. So we could sense that it was like a blue ocean. We invented a market no one knew existed, in that everyone thinks of real estate technology as like, okay, tell me why the landlord would buy you or why a broker would buy you. Well, guess what? These tenant operators have many more important things to deal with, which is like, how do you get your restaurant humming? How do you make sure that you're in business the next day? Real estate's not it's not top of mind for them, but they just have to sign their leases. So we built this platform thinking that, okay, we're going to make sure that tenants succeed. COVID starts to roll around, and all of the naysayers really across the industry, they said, oh my God, prop tech's going to crash.
Right.
Massive, be prepared. And so we said, hey, we only got 6.5 people. I think we're pretty prepared. We know how to build product, and let's just, we're going to buckle down, but there was nothing massive. turns out we grew phenomenally during that period. And it just proved even further how much of a need there was in our kind of our target market. No one knew where their documents were. No one knew who their landlord was. No one knew what clauses and provisions they needed to take care of to renegotiate their locations. So that was very refreshing and rewarding. We're like, holy cow. And then that's when we got the interest of investors. They were going, wait a minute, you're growing during COVID.
Right.
Your location count's growing. Your net new logos, all the brands that you're bringing on board. So that was like an aha moment.
Very clear you guys have an identity at Leasecake. So what would you say that is? Because I was reading through, I could look at the things you believe in, and it was a list of all the technical
Right.
stuff related to your business, but also talked about good beer, bourbon, empanadas. So obviously it's a fun culture.
It's culture that I think it really kind of comes from the soul of who we are as people. I mean, I never want to take myself too seriously. You're typically the first to crack a joke. I mean, end of the day, we talked about prop tech. Prop tech is just it's a buzzword, but it's boring, right? People buy solutions to real problems from real people, right? And end of the day, it's really we're a people-based company. Leasecake is not a prop tech solution. We're not a technology platform. We're more of an emotion and a feeling. It's like, why doesn't a real estate application, why doesn't a location-based application live on your phone today? Just like Uber is to go places, and LinkedIn is to meet people, and Airbnb is to travel. Like all of those things, Salesforce is like CRM. Like there's no real estate application. So I wanted to create a playful, simple, surprising brand. And it just so happened the domain was available. 2 words that probably never belonged to each other, right? And it just became memorable and sticky. And I said, I want to make certain that everyone understands that a company like Leasecake, we give away spatulas. We talk about you take the cake. You talk about just different things that make us sound so separate from the rest of the industry, which is, I think, so important today, where we lead with trust and empathy and curiosity. So all of that packaged together, it's, never take yourself too seriously. I'm the chief empanada officer. We're all people wanting to kind of connect and build something and be involved in something that actually helps other people, which is so important, because it's not about just selling. It's about understanding. It's about walking in their shoes, feeling their pain, and actually helping them sleep better at night. Because I saw that firsthand. I saw that with what my parents went through. How they had to move their 2,000 square foot, all their location stuff, over a course of a couple of weeks. And I think, life's too short to have to deal with one side being on one side of the power seat versus the other. So how do we level the playing field? How do we connect with our customers, be empathetic and lead with caring? And it makes sense. There's the great resignation that's going on, but we have this good fortune to almost be going through the great hiring. I think anyone that we speak to that's a candidate for one of our roles, they want to belong. They want a sense of family. They want a sense of purpose. They don't want necessarily just to be making some magic number. The first question that I've always asked was, it's great that you're making this. Like, what do you need? And when they say, I just really need this, but it's the intangibles of belonging that I think are so important, that it's evidenced itself because of what we've all been through.
I think it's really cool to see too, on that point, and see you unpack all of that and how you tie in empathy and problem solving. It seems like you've had over your career too, really kind of every role in a company as well. And now you're a CEO, founder. How did you get to this point, really? Was it just a culmination of all these experiences and some aha moment, or has it just kind of led you to this point and now you just have all these experiences and it's led you to create the culture you have at Leasecake and life for yourself? Or was there some inflection point along that way where you realize, this is what you're meant to do?
Yeah. I think we're going to need a couple of cocktails. But, no one grows up. Certainly I never grew up to to be raised. My son's going to be a CEO.
Right.
I think, well, a lot of it was just, it was luck, but it's so humbling, Jeff. It is so humbling to kind of like rise to the call, right? Answer the
Right.
call. And I think with what happened that night at Techstars, I had no idea where it would end up. And our chapter and our story is not finished, certainly. But the fact that we're sitting here on this really cool sofa in Winter Park and we're talking about the journey. Yeah, I do feel like I've been training for this all my life, but I had no idea what I was training for. And I look back and all my friends said, Taj, you were never really an accountant at Disney. I'm like, damn it. I wish somebody had told me that, when
Right.
I was there. And
Right.
they said, I was the guy that helped them get stuff done, right? All of our projects were on time and on budget, right? The $2 billion of projects. And, and I look back and I say, gosh, if they saw that in me, that I was never really that good, like they saw something else in me, which I kind of felt, in my heart. But there's no way I could have predicted how this, how I could be here today.
I think that's pretty cool. I relate to that in a lot of ways. And I think at the end of the day, all you can do is just collect all these different experiences and people, like you were saying earlier, relationships, and see what the future has in store. And so I
Yeah.
think it's cool to see that.
Both you, Jeff and Mitchell, you both have that same kind of ethos, right? Your APCs, awesome people collectors, and you recognize what you're good at. And then lo and behold, you say, man, let's start something and do something different and connect with people who have genuine stories. I think that's so laudable. But you never knew you were going to do that 10 years
Right.
ago. Right?
Exactly.
It's certainly not core to our business. It's just something that intrigues us. And I'm curious with you, are there specific habits you attribute to the success you've had, or is it just you got a passion and you truly care about what you do and the people around you, and it's just kind of happened that way?
There's this term called lifelong learners, and it's a bit trite, but curiosity drives me.
Mhm.
Just probably like you all. It's like, what makes me tick? You have to be open to new ideas. The moment that you go in and you do a great job and all your clients are happy and you come home and you have a great weekend and you do the same thing over and over, that's just not me. And I want to learn, and I just have this insane curiosity. So I read. I'm not a prolific, book reader. If you were asking me, what are the 5 business books I read? I use Blinkist, I use summaries, but there's so much content out there that just feeds my
Right.
random desire to learn,
Right.
whether it's building a website or how to instill stronger culture and engagement. I mean, that's just how I am. I'm just wired differently. I like connecting people like you guys do.
Did you learn Italian when you were over in Italy? Because I feel like with that kind of mindset, you've got to dabble in stuff like that. You lived abroad how many times now?
3 countries. Yeah. Italy, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So out of all the places you've lived, we'll exclude Orlando. It's an obvious.
Yeah.
Where have you
Canada.
enjoyed living the most?
Italy. I mean,
It's hard to beat.
it's home. I mean, so you asked me about, did I learn Italian? You bet. And I learned it conversationally because I just, I didn't want to be in a classroom. So that's how I got an instructor, and we were in some Berlitz class. And for the first 3 weeks, I'm going, I can't do this anymore. I can't conjugate verbs. I can't write in a notebook and go to page 39. Like, can we just walk around? And so I did. I said, Emmanuel was my instructor. He's such a close friend. And I learned probably 30 to 40% fluent Italian.
Really?
Enough so much that when we left, I was able to cuss out my Italian landlord lady.
Landlord of all
my
things.
landlady. And so I did that in front of my instructor, we were like having a cappuccino or something. And he's like, Taj, do you know what you just did? You just cussed out.
Yeah.
I cussed her out, but I was like
Right.
pushing back really
Right,
hard as we were
yeah.
moving out, coming back to the US. But I mean, you just have to know how you learn,
Mhm.
right? Just be curious about what your learning style is,
Absolutely.
and be adaptive. And I think, I'd say I'm probably more of an introspective person to know, hey, what feeds me, probably just like you guys, like you wanted to do something different. And, this happens to feed you, right? It's not core to your business, but it just feels good.
And you lived, we were talking about abroad a few times. came back to Orlando every time. We were talking about at the beginning with how you're naming this next phase for Orlando. What is it? Is it just home, or what is it that keeps bringing you back here and, raising a family here and wanting to, potentially be here for the long haul?
I mean, there's so many great cities in our country, but I mean, certainly my family's here.
Yeah.
My parents are older. Got two beautiful daughters. One's out in California. One's here in Orlando. But I think it was comfort. It was easy to come back to, and we just have great friends, incredible friends from Celebration. The most fascinating thing, you talk about culture, right? You asked this question about culture. Disney Development Company no longer existed in its formal corporate capacity because they merged into WDI mid 90s. And the strongest of friends that we have are the ones that were expats at Disney. Like we lived in Italy together, raised kids together, traveled, drank tons of wine together. um, and so that kind of bond of friendship brought us certainly back here to Central Florida. And every time we came back, I mean, there were points in time. I mean, 2008, 2009, it was like, holy cow, this place is really needs to like diversify its economy and all
Right.
that. So we kind of watched the whole roller coaster of Central Florida,
Mhm.
but it feels right,
Mm.
and it's certainly now this next chapter, like we just talked about, it's super cool to see. Can't wait.
Next chapter on that too with Leasecake. What does that look like?
We are so excited about the future because our customers don't see us as the rest of the industry sees us, right? We are not a prop tech company. We are a company that helps multi-tenant operators save time and allows them to focus on what matters. And it's powerful because it's consumer-centric design, beautifully designed, flexible, and easy to use applications are so important today in having them work for you and not the other way around. We're now a leader in lease administration and lease accounting, something that we never thought we would ever achieve. But there's no one monopoly. There's no Salesforce of lease administration. There's no monopoly of storing your leases or lease accounting. So why is that? It's a 30 to 40-year-old industry, and it's boring, and it's stayed, and it just does one thing. And there's so much power in the data that if you liberate it, then you can help people focus on the dates, the dollars, and the documents that you can take action on that is available on any device, anywhere, anytime. And it becomes transformative. So it's not just tenants, it's not just landlords, but it's the entire ecosystem that helps those businesses succeed. So CPAs are now buying Leasecake, brokers are buying Leasecake, insurance brokers are recommending Leasecake, lenders are seeing the power of Leasecake, private equity firms are buying Leasecake, and they're seeing the value of how to quickly get a transaction between a buyer and seller facility because the data is clean and it's pure, and they now have a platform when they buy it. So this is where this is not prop tech. This is about changing people's lives and transforming how business is done. We're still in the early innings. It's been 5 years.
Right.
But the reason that we've got investors that are very, very grounded and very genuinely excited about the opportunity is that they've looked at this industry, over 30, 40 years old, and they've asked the same questions like, what's wrong with these software solutions that are legacy? They're hard to maneuver. They're hard to manage. You got to work to get them to work for you. It's just that's wrong, right? Every one of our customers says, I can do in a day what I can do in 5 minutes what it usually took me a day to do.
Really?
Or usually it takes me an hour to do it, and boom, I have something within a matter of a minute. So that means something, and it's how do we tell the world? How do we continue to grow? So international is a big push for us this year
Okay.
as well. We've got really great customers that already have footprints well outside the U.S. and not just U.S. but North America, and I mean, it's kind of like it's ours. It's winning is the only option.
Do you think that your time at Disney has shaped how you view culture and how you've tried to build a culture around Leasecake?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that. It didn't dawn on me until probably about 3 years ago. I mean, I walked in here and I was wearing a name tag.
Yeah.
Right. And so the human connection is important. Always smiling is so important. Understanding and leading with empathy is important. How Disney onboarded their cast members, right? They're not called employees. We don't call our team members employees. We call them peeps, people exemplifying exceptional performance, right? That's a thing that we've created. We have teams. We don't have departments. We've got team leaders. We have bosses. All of that, and it even goes down to the bungalow that we're in. It's called LCB, Leasecake Bungalow. The new HQ is going to be called the kitchen. We're not going to call it the office. It's the kitchen, right? Welcome to the kitchen. So you've got to stay playful with your brand, and you've got to be relatable. But man, what Disney taught me the first 5 days of my job at Disney when I was 27 years old, you had to go to Disney University. Actually, I think it was called Disney Orientation. It was before Disney University. And for 5 days, you were there before you even got to your desk. So I was a project controller, and I was there with monorail operators. I was there with VPs, and you learned about the history of Walt and his story. So we've got Leasecake Academy at our company, and the very first couple of weeks when we have a cohort of people that are joining, I say, welcome to the kitchen. We're going to spend an hour learning about the history of Leasecake, how we're wired, why trust, empathy, and curiosity are important, why talent, experience, and chemistry are important, simple, secure, and set. All those things become the mantra, because if you can make your team members or your peeps the brand ambassador, then you've won. And I want everyone in our company to be that brand in their own way, right? Whether they're at a barbecue or their neighbor or, even their next job, or they're in a business function. It's like, hey, what do you do at Leasecake? Oh man, Leasecake's so much fun. This is what we do, So everybody at Disney's that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a ton. I'm very, very thankful for my journey there.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. Because I'm fascinated about, we already talked about culture, but just my sister-in-law worked at Disney, and just as an intern for 2 months, and the amount of training they did just for her, who was only going to be there for 2 months, to understand why culture was important, how to approach people, shake people's hand, look in the eyes, smile, call them by their name. She learned a ton just from that short time. So I'd love to hear that carries over to your business as well.
Massive life lessons. And anyone that rolls their eyes after they walk out of one of those training sessions, they don't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
They might not belong in probably 90% of the companies,
right?
Because they just don't get it, right? We're humans. We're interacting with humans. People want to buy from people they trust and that they understand and respect. Education is so important, and you never want to sell. You want to help them learn. You want to help educate them along the way. So all of that is packaged up, but it's tough to, how do you do that at scale?
Mm-hmm.
But we've got a really great, team. We have the green team, which is the leadership team. We have the blue team, which is the next, the next group of leaders that are growing. And if you invest all that time in them and just continue to cascade it, that's when scale happens.
What would you say to someone starting out? I don't care what industry it is, just for a younger person trying to be successful, trying to do things the right way. What is your blanket advice for that person?
Work on things that make you happy. The faster you find happiness in what you're doing, you'll succeed at anything. It's kind of like, nobody wants to be put in a box. Nobody wants to be told what to do. And if you're told what to do, this is why college is so important. Choose your major immediately. Well, the reason is because you might hate it, but be exposed to other things. Find the thing that makes you thrive and tick, and then lean into it. It's like, where you spend your effort is what you should invest in yourself. Because man, if I had done that 20, 30 years ago, I don't know, I might not even be on the sofa. I might be doing something completely different. Mm-hmm. I'm not to say, it would be a success or a failure, but it's just the sooner you find happiness.
Well, Taj, I appreciate the time. It's a privilege to sit down with you and with someone who's had such success, but such success in companies that put Central Florida, our hometown that we love, on the map. So can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Jeff.
Yeah,
enjoyed it. It was a pleasure.